All right, so we're going to get a little bit caught up today. What you have here, obviously, we're going to talk about revival and reform and how those two go together, and first of all, where they come from. We're going to see that they come from a similar place. We've already seen some of these tendencies already happen, and it's going to kind of pick up what's already been laid down in American history, and then we're going to see sort of the results. So, in some ways, we're going to look at the causes of revival and then the effects of that revival. All right. So, one of the things that we need to recall was the. Let me bounce over here. Whoa! Hey, what's going on here? That's just some horrible handwriting, is all that is. One of the things that we want to recall was the last time that we saw a big revival in the United States, and where that revival had a significant impact on American history. All right, so I understand that this happened. We talked about this weeks and weeks ago, so I don't expect anybody to remember. But what did we call that? The last revival that had a big impact on American history. Yes, Michael?
The Great Awakening.
The Great Awakening. Very good. All right, the Great Awakening. Now, even harder question, but it might help that you wrote an essay about it. What effect did that Great Awakening have on America? Why did we talk about this in an American history class? Why did we talk about this Great Awakening? Why was it important? Yeah.
It changed history, like it caused the course of history to go differently. Like many people were saved and people started to unite so they could fight the war for independence together instead of separated.
Okay, so it provided some sense of unity. All right, it provided some sense of unity, and that people all could agree on this common experience that they'd all had. And other Jonathan, what did you have there? Yes, desire for political freedom. It represented some religious freedom. What happened in that this revival created a religious experience in these people, right? And that religious experience was so precious and so great in those people that when their church leadership disregarded it and dismissed it and said, "Oh, it's just enthusiasm," they all said, "Whatever, church leadership," and they all started, and new churches, new denominations started popping up because the old leadership of the church they lost all their credibility. And so people started to free themselves from their religious authorities. And that got people thinking, hey, if we can declare independence from our religious authorities, maybe we could actually declare independence from our political authorities as well. So that was what we saw in the First Great Awakening. And a lot of that was built on this idea of an individual religious experience. Okay? Individual. So on the back of your handout, sorry. So this is a blank sheet there. Go to make your sheet blank. Go to the back. It's built on an individual religious experience. You know, your pastor can't have this religious experience for you, right? So that in and of itself sort of decreases the importance of that leadership, okay? And it increases the importance of the individual, the common person. And this is another thing about the First Great Awakening, is that you had guys like George Whitefield. And George Whitefield was not a pastor that stayed in a church and preached to one group of people, but he was a preacher who traveled around. And because he traveled around, he was able to speak to all different kinds of people. And so George Whitefield didn't just get the founding fathers of the country together in a room and preach the gospel to them. He went out into the countryside and he preached to farmers and blacksmiths and regular old Joes. And not only that, but he went out and he preached to slaves and he preached to Native Americans. Okay, so he and the Great Awakening itself represented this sort of reaching out to the common person, the everyday people, right? So also, let's see, it happened among the common person, when we talk about the common person, something that's not reserved for some elite or some exclusive group, but it's something that's available for everybody. The common person has access to it. What words come to mind that we've discussed in class that address the everyday person? Not just the educated elite, but everyday people. Yes?
Factory workers.
So factory workers would belong to this, yes. Certainly in the this would be like the working class. Yeah. But as far as looking out for the interests of the everyday person, rather than just like the people who are like in leadership or who are really qualified, democracy, right? That's what democracy is all about. So recall this guy. Remember this was not very long ago, although it was like, 2 helpings of turkey and three helpings of stuffing ago, so you might not remember it. But we looked at Andrew Jackson, and Jackson is supposed to be this big representative, this big hero of democracy, standing up for the little guy. He's not like a politician. He's a war hero, self-made man. He's old hickory. He's from the country. Good old boy. That's who we want in charge. So the fact that this guy got elected was even just a symbol that we as a country have become fascinated with and have come to value much more so than anything else, this idea of democracy. And so the fact that even Jackson's name is going to, even still today, be attached. So they're going to come up with an adjective form of his name, Jacksonian. And so you have this thing, Jacksonian democracy, that they talk about. And when they say Jacksonian democracy, they mean like democracy, like really, really kind of trying to get away from the idea of dependence on an elite leadership. Kind of like, we don't like aristocrats and all that. We just common everyday self-made man. So these are things that the First Great Awakening sort of produces, is an idea, the individual religious experience, an emphasis on the common person, okay? And so what we're going to talk about, the revival that we're going to talk about today is not the First Great Awakening. The fact that we call that the First Great Awakening implies that there's a Second Great Awakening, right? And so that's the revival that we're going to talk about today, because what happens in the 19th century now, so in the 1800s, what's going to happen is that a lot of these ideas are going to sort of snowball. This democratic idea, right, is going to increase, and this emphasis on an individual religious experience is going to increase. And so when people say, hey, you know what we need is we need another Great Awakening, what we need is something else that we can actually, we need to get more believers on board. We need to make more converts. We need to awaken the faith of this country again. In this time around, it's not going to be like in the First Great Awakening. Hey, let's wait on God to revive us. Okay, with the First Great Awakening, it's like God does a work, and everybody looks at that work and they say, "Hey, we just had a religious experience. and that changes, that sort of changes the course of history. Now it's going to be like, hey, we need another one of those. Well, we can do that. We can do that if we take this. So the Second Great Awakening is going to say, all right, take your common everyday people, all right, and then let's as long as we define faith as something that you don't need to be educated for, right? So like, we need something that a farmer or a blacksmith or a slave could believe, right? So let's just let's take away any of the thinking side of things off the table, and let's just narrow the Christian faith down to this religious experience, okay? And so we take common people plus an emphasis on the religious experience. Well, then we can create that religious experience for people, right? We can make that religious experience happen. You play the right kind of music, you say the right kind of words in the right kind of context. So we'll just set up a tent. We'll drag an organ out there or a piano or something and play the right kinds of songs and say the right kind of message in the right kind of voice. These are what these revival preachers call the new measures. The new measures are the right kinds of words, right kinds of music, right kinds of words. And we can create that religious experience for people. And we'll just, as much as we can, decomplicate the faith. Okay, so there's nothing that you actually have to. You don't have to like grow in knowledge and wisdom. You don't have to you don't have to understand anything. You just have to experience something. You just have to feel a certain way towards Jesus, and you'll be good, right? In that context, we can create a lot of converts, right? That's what the Second Great Awakening is saying. It's saying you add all these things together, and we can produce revival. We can produce a revival by creating a religious experience for people. By what is that? What does that even mean? Why did I even say that? By creating a religious experience for people. Ah. So, this is what we're trying to do. There are a lot of things going into this that I'll spare you all my theology nerd details on. That I love to geek out in front of you with, but I won't do that. But there are some significant differences between the two. Okay, and I think it's important to recognize how the two are very different. But but hopefully we can see how the second one is taking distinct advantage of something that most people are taking for granted after the First Great Awakening. It wasn't always really necessarily an essential component of Christianity, but becomes really emphasized after that, and that's the idea of an individual religious experience. That becomes a big key for how we can, if that's true, we can create that. We can recreate that for people. And, you know, I think a Jonathan Edwards, who lived in the First Great Awakening, would probably disagree with that. He would probably say, no, that you didn't understand what this experience was. It was a conversion. It was God supernaturally changing your affections. You can't create that in people. But Jonathan Edwards wasn't there to actually disagree with Charles Finney, and so. But that's what we're talking about when we talk about this revival, and it was hugely important. This is a big part of taking the gospel message, or at least a significant part of the gospel message, to a huge number of people in the United States. And while the First Great Awakening, we had a chart where it kind of brought these groups on the outside and it kind of moved them towards the middle. Right? You had deists on one side, and you had these Puritan, the old pilgrims, those kinds of people on the other side. And this common religious experience at least gave them this agreement on, we want political freedom, and we whatever we disagree on, we definitely agree that the old lights are wrong. Okay, and so they can agree on this. What's happening here, and the revival's doing part of it, but immigration, like you read about, and like you mentioned in your outlines for Monday, immigration does a lot of this, just through like all these different worldviews now that we have to interact with, and we're sort of reacting against. It's going to move everybody away from the middle. Okay, so that what you have here, you got some big scary words that I'm trying to explain for you. Heterodox. That just means people that change the gospel, okay? The gospel message of Christianity, biblical Christianity, they're going to take things from biblical Christianity. They're going to, they'll say, yeah, we love Jesus. Well, Jesus was a good prophet, good guy. He didn't heal anybody. He didn't raise from the dead. Come on, don't be ridiculous. So that's obviously changing the gospel, right? So we're not just talking about tweaking the gospel. We're talking about abandoning the faith, okay? When we say change the gospel, that's what we're talking about here. All right? So there are people on this left side of it that are they're getting rid of Christianity. There's people on the right side, they're keeping everything. They're preserving, they're keeping it. All right? So right side of the chart, good. Left side of the chart, bad. Okay? And we definitely have a good and a bad on the left side. But then we have another sort of range here, and that's between the top of the chart, which is going to be rationalists, which think about that as like the head or thinking, right? Science, investigation, observation, these kinds of things, okay? The degree to which we want to establish things logically through reason and through experimentation and these kinds of things. Cognitive would be another name for that. Like that would be a rationalist. So the higher up you go, the more it's like heady stuff, okay? The more down you go, the more it's about feelings. Nothing more than feelings. About the heart. About, and these are called romanticists. That's a real word, by the way. It doesn't mean like, there you see her, sitting there across the way. It's not that kind of romantic, okay? But it is like involving the heart in the sense of like, hey, all you people that are thinking about stuff, you're overthinking it. Analyzing things, you just ruin it. You're sucking the life out of life. It should be experienced, and you should feel it, not think it. Okay, those would be romanticists, right? That would say that life is more about what you experience, what you feel, than it is about what you think. All right, so you're going to have people in both of those camps, and people in ranges in the middle. But let's look at the top. Among rationalists, there are a lot of people that are looking at science, and one of the scientific theories, by the way, that's been discovered is Charles Darwin's theory of evolution and that. So while that's not popular by any stretch of the imagination in the United States, there is an increased group of people that are saying that, the Christian faith, there are things in it that just don't line up with reason, with logic, and with science. Okay, there's some people that are coming to that conclusion, and so they're saying, we think that if you really think about things, you have to get rid of certain parts of the gospel, and so in this time, a group of Christians not Christians, I'm not going to call them Christians, but a group of people that use Christian language and would call themselves Christians but are not, called the Unitarians, and we've been introduced to them before. Okay, these people have been around for a while, and they were around during the First Great Awakening, but Unitarians are going to grow significantly during this time. All right, and the Unitarian that you read about in your reading, William Ellery Channing. And unfortunately, it's going to be some of those denominations. That looks like Chamming. That's not Channing. Oh, that's really tiny. It probably doesn't need to be that small. I could probably make it bigger for you. William Ellery Channing Tatum. That's a joke. It's not Channing Tatum. Okay. He's sort of a big representative of Unitarians there. Unitarians would say, like the doctrine of the Trinity. We don't believe the Trinity. That doesn't make sense. I know math, and 1 + 1 + 1 = 3, not 1. Okay, which is not what the Trinity is, by the way. Okay, but they're looking at a misunderstanding of the Trinity and saying it doesn't make sense. So let's get rid of it and let's just be Unitarians. Okay, let's not say Jesus was fully God. He didn't do miracles and stuff like that. We'll still get together and worship on Sundays. We'll worship something. It just won't be the God of Christianity. All right. So that's Unitarians. And what the big institution, the school, that was a training center for pastors, that's going to sort of abandon biblical Christianity and kind of go the way of reason and science. I'm not saying like reason is actually opposed, and you'll see that in a moment because we're going to go to the other side. Is going to be Harvard University. It may surprise you that Harvard University was originally founded as a training center for pastors, that it was a very conservative institution that trained Christian pastors in the gospel ministry. That's what it was founded to do. Well, this is where it starts to not do that anymore. Okay, is during this time. When it does that, by the way, the many who had formerly been associated with Harvard are going to jump ship, and they're going to come down here, and I'll leave some room for some other notes here. They're going to jump ship, and they're going to actually found a new seminary called Andover Seminary. And you read about Andover Seminary. A seminary is like a grad school for pastors, right? Okay, so that's all seminary means. It's like where you go to school to become a pastor, and so Andover was the sort of conservative meaning conserving the gospel here. Okay, not conservative in politically or fiscally conservative, just conservative in keeping the gospel. So, all right. The side that's going to argue to keep the gospel, but very much from a scientific rationalist point of view, right? There's going to be a group that says, no. The Christian faith is very reasonable, and now we're going to use reason and science and logic to prove and defend historic biblical Christianity. The group that's going to do that more than anything are the Presbyterians. Presbyterians are going to be represented largely at Princeton Seminary, or Princeton University, actually, at this time. So Princeton University today is long since not Christian and not Presbyterian. Princeton Seminary today is still, comparatively speaking, fairly conservative, although they're not terribly conservative. I had a good friend that used to teach at Collin County that went to Princeton, and he said he was easily the most conservative person on campus. Though his professors there, and that's the important thing, his professors were actually, he said, extremely Christian. Not all of them, but some of them, which is really remarkable that it would be so still. And so some of the names here, so at Princeton, the Presbyterian at Princeton that is going to use this, rationalist defense of the faith is a man by the name of Charles Hodge. And I don't think he was in your reading, but he bears mention because he is really important kind of for defending Christianity from this kind of perspective. But another sort of revival happens as well at Yale University. And so Yale is still keeping and preserving Christianity, though there was like I said, Unitarianism was increasing at Yale, but Timothy Dwight is the great grandson of Jonathan Edwards, and he is president of Yale, and he kind of overhauls Yale University, and so that's Timothy Dwight. All right, so that's all happening up here among the rationalist group. That's where all this change is happening with the head. But there's also people that are saying, "Hey, stop sucking the life out of everything. Just feel, man. It's cool." And there are people that are going to do that and actually abandon the gospel. They're going to say, "Hey, you don't need to think and investigate and reason to arrive at the truth. You can arrive at the truth just through time with yourself. Just search yourself, man." Okay, and those are going to be called the transcendentalists. So get ready. A lot of letters here that we're going to write. It's a long word. Okay, transcendentalists. Holy cow. So transcend. Okay, to transcend means to go beyond. All right. To ascend is to go up. To descend is to go down. To transcend is to go over, right? It's to go. It's to literally kind of to go across, right? But it means to go beyond, right? And so a transcendentalist is they're going to go beyond reason. They're going to go beyond, and really here, what's at stake here is going beyond received truth or revelation, right? I don't need somebody else to tell me something. I can arrive at truth just through contemplation, just through experiencing life, man. So Henry David Thoreau, he's going to just go out and he goes out on Walden Pond, and he's like, I'm just going to live out in the woods for a while, man. And that's going to be, I'm just going to keep talking. And so Walden Pond is all about an experiment of him just experiencing life, just transcending reason and revelation and all that. Okay, so Henry David Thoreau is one of those names. It's spelled like that, Thoreau. And transcendentalists, if they love anything, they love their middle names. Okay, so Henry David Thoreau and Ralph Waldo Emerson. Right? It's making us say their middle names. Come on, guys. Let's cool it with middle name stuff. So Ralph Waldo Emerson is the other one. That's mine. That's not mine. I don't know if that's important, but that's not mine. Those are the transcendentalists, and they're going to abandon Christian faith. Okay, these are not Christian individuals. They might use some religious language and stuff, but they're not abandoning the Christian faith because it's not reasonable. They're abandoning the Christian faith because you don't need it to arrive at truth or or virtue or this or that. Okay. So while we're down here, while we're looking at heart/feeling ways of abandoning the Christian faith, there's also a group that's going to, very different than the Transcendentalists, by the way, but doing something very similar, is a group called the Mormons. Okay, Mormons are going to claim to be true Christianity, but they arrive at that not really through rationalist perspective, but very much through romanticism. So they're going to, Joseph Smith has this vision, and then he convinces people of the validity of this vision by appealing to this warmness in your heart. The warmness in the heart becomes a very important part of like how Mormons talk about whether or not they know something to be true. Right? They're convinced of something if they're warm in their heart over it. Okay, kind of sounds like indigestion, but it's not. It's not that. It's not heartburn. I don't know. If that's the case, chili is very, very true because it warms my heart significantly. Anyway, but then here's this group that we've already looked at and a little bit, sort of, and I would say the Second Great Awakening goes right in here. Very much, if we want common people to be able to, if we want to create conversions and religious experience among common people, let's not make religious experience something you have to actually think about, right? Let's take away any thinking part aspect of the Christian faith away from it, so that common everyday people can do it. Now, that's not really fair, right? Because anybody can believe and anybody can have faith, but that faith is supposed to grow in a reasonable way, right? That you're going to grow in your knowledge of things. And so I think that they're making an unnecessary distinction there. But here again, I'm geeking out on you again, so I'm going to stop doing that. But I'm not going to stop doing that, by the way. I'm completely lying. I'm going to keep geeking out, but I'll stop myself when I do. Okay. And one of the most famous Second Great Awakening preachers at this time, and I'm going to actually separate them out because not all Second Great Awakening preachers were as bad as he, but I am going to separate Charles Finney and put him over here because Charles Finney really does abandon several very important, or at least questions or devalues several very important aspects of Christian faith. And so I'm putting him way over in the middle there. Oh, he should be more in the middle than I put him. I thought he was in the middle. But you can just kind of, right? So he's and there might be a little bit of question as to where he goes, but the fact that there's question as to where he goes says that he's really not very clear on, like, hey, here's the Christian faith, and we're going to defend the Christian faith. He's just kind of like, hey, get people to believe. Well, believe what? That doesn't matter. Just get people, give them this religious experience. Play the songs at the right tempo, the right lyrics, and I'll go out there and I'll give a really good, big message. He even had this thing called the anxious bench, and it was this bench that people would sit on, and they had to sit at that bench until they could pray through their crisis. Right? So sit there at that bench and just think about it. Just pray through until you feel like you've arrived at conversion. Right? I mean, if some really scary guys on a stage telling you can't get out of the bench until you've had a religious experience, you might have a religious experience, right? I mean, even if it's just because you got to go potty. So anyway, that's not fair to Finney. But the anxious bench is not one of the most theological astute things he does. Okay, so there's a group there that are in. Some of them are sort of abandoning, but they're not also, like, we have definitely some that are keeping the gospel message, and the two groups that are going to grow the most out of this would be down here. They belong in the bottom right. Would be Methodists. So Methodism would definitely have a stronger focus on the heart and feelings. It would be more of a romanticist Christian movement, but very Christian, right? Very representing historic biblical Christianity. And then another group that's going to also grow immensely at this time are going to be the Baptists. Oh, the old jacket.
It was cold this morning.
Yeah. Somebody didn't treat the jacket very well. It was draped.
Hey, was it you?
All right. So both of these groups are going to grow, by the way. Baptists grow, Methodists grow. And you saw the Methodists in the missions out to Oregon, right? You read about Methodist missionaries in Oregon. Any famous Baptists that you read about? I can't recall. I'm rusty on the reading as far as if they mention any famous. Anyway, so. But these two denominations grow far more than anybody. So Unitarians are growing, but by far, this is what the majority of American Christians are becoming. Okay, this group is kind of, they're the academic sort of leaders of Christianity in the country. But what's happening in the country, as you can see, is Christianity is just becoming less academic. Christianity is becoming less dependent on what professors say. And so Christianity is saying, it doesn't really matter what some stuffy dude with leather elbow patches in some ivory tower says about my faith, right? My faith is, I just read my Bible for myself, right? And that's kind of becoming the thrust of Christianity. So these people are exercising more influence in the schools. But what's happening is they're just less. These people are becoming what most people actually are, and it's not that they don't have their own schools, that they're not doing some academic thinking. It's just a very small focus in their weekly worship. Okay. Now, I mentioned, and this is where you find out how big of a geek I've been, is that this is all. This is all the cause, and we've just been talking about the revival part. But along with this emphasis, like we said, of we can actually create this, right? We can we can take charge of this thing and actually make it happen. There's a big emphasis on individual responsibility, right? If we don't have to wait for God to revive. We can do it. Well, translate that down to the people who have just been revived, who have just had a religious experience, and suddenly they also have this, hey, we can do things. We can look at some social issues that need to be changed. We don't need to wait for God to change those. We don't need to wait for Jesus to come back for the sick to be healed and for the poor to be cared for. We can actually look at social problems and we can fix them. And so for as much as I like to throw the Second Great Awakening under the bus, which is like to say not the greatest thing in the world. A lot of good things come about from it, okay? And one of those, so these are all social areas that you see at the bottom here, areas of social reform that are really a pretty close direct result of the Second Great Awakening, okay? So one of them is education. Remember, the Second Great Awakening is it's about the common person, right? Everyday old person. And democracy says, hey, the common everyday person gets to have a say in government. We, the people, rule our country, right? Well, if we, the people, rule, if everybody gets to vote, everybody needs to be educated, right? I mean, we don't want people voting who just don't even know how governments work, right? So, if the common people get to vote come up. Common. That's when I jump to the next letter I'm going to write next. need to be educated, or at least informed. All right? And so, this is going to be one of those, that first emphasis of public education. Let's provide education for the common person, for everybody. All right? And so, the person who did this, the founder of public education, is a man by the name of Horace Mann. It's a man by the name of Mann. Mann. But it's two N's, so, yeah. He founds, he doesn't find, but he founds the first public school. The other thing is, hey, let's remember, just like George Whitefield went out and he preached to common everyday people, farmers, blacksmiths, even slaves, guess what? The Second Great Awakening is also going to have these tent revivals, and they're going to take they're going to take that message out there even to slaves, right? So you have, first of all, you have the converts in the North, people who are saying, hey, we can do something, we can make this happen. So you're going to get more abolitionists in the North, but you're also getting slaves even converted in the South. So more abolitionists in the North. So let's get one thing clear. There have been abolitionists from the very beginning, okay? There have been Americans who wanted to end slavery. That is, people want to end slavery. From the very beginning, okay? Well, let's finish out right here, and we'll actually finish this handout next time, okay? But let's go ahead and end class here for now. Okay, but you also have slaves converted in the South. And that's going to create this big population, even of slaves that are coming to faith, that are being converted. They're having this religious experience, and so that is going to create this increased awareness of the humanity and the dignity of the slaves that are there. So what we're talking about with suffrage and temperance. Suffrage doesn't sound like a good thing. It's a very good thing. This is a women's right to vote. And we saw where that impulse came from. A new identity that women are going to have that's not limited to the home anymore. Women are going to be started to view, just like we see these slaves are converting to Christianity, maybe they deserve equal dignity. Well, if women are getting jobs, maybe they deserve equal rights. Now, interestingly, slaves are going to earn the constitutional right to vote long before women actually do. But here we see this, hey, we can take it into our own hands. We can create this change. We can actually work towards women's suffrage. But there's also this idea of temperance, and that is we need to do something to regulate / moderate alcohol. Okay? Alcohol abuse at this point in history is a serious problem, and what's interesting, notice that these are in the same box. That a lot of times the same groups are representing both causes: women's rights and the desire to moderate alcohol. And the common denominator here is a very sad reality that that one of them is often that they are related far too often in domestic abuse cases. And so this is the connection between the two is found in the fact that alcohol is leading to domestic abuse. All right. If you don't know what domestic abuse is, domestic abuse would be that's husbands physically assaulting, abusing their wives. Okay, so here, this is the story that we see here of sort of the snowballing of the democratic nature of the First Great Awakening, of the emphasis on democracy, and of the focus on religious experience, snowballing into the Second Great Awakening, where we can actually do that ourselves. We can create a revival by giving that religious experience, producing that religious experience. The result is a population of the United States who is empowered through democracy and now desires to create these changes. So again, as much as I tend to throw the Second Great Awakening under the bus, God is going to work socially through it, even if not theologically or spiritually. And again, I'm being a little bit biased and geeking out on you here, but to create some really good, enduring changes, or at least to raise awareness of them at this point in history.